Hello and welcome again. My name is Piyu Roy. I'm a program manager here at University of Washington Professional and Continuing Education. Welcome to our third in our series of career management. We're doing in association with UW Alumni Association. I have with me here Yolanda and Kayla, who are from UW AA. Since you already know Catherine, I'm going to let her introduce herself a second time. And just to go over housekeeping rules again, there is a Q&A box at the bottom. If you shake your screen on Zoom, you'll be able to see it. Please type in your questions over there. If you see a question that you also would like to have answered, please like it. So that'll bubble up the questions which are more important higher in our list. We'll go through Q&A only towards the end of the session today. So, just keep adding questions and we'll address them one by one, depending on how important they are or how important they look. These slides and recordings will be posted back by Monday, I have been told, and not by tomorrow. And I apologize in advance to people who did not receive a reminder for this event. If you know somebody who's looking for the details again, you can send it to them. It's the same link for everybody. But also you could advise them to re-register and that will send them a new link for today. And I hope that everybody is able to make it or at least watch the recordings later. So without further ado, Catherine, why don't we start?
Okay. Thank you, Piyu, for having me back. I've really enjoyed putting together a presentation that complements last week's webinar and also gives you all entirely new content to chew on. I'm thinking I won't pause for questions until the end, but Piyu, feel free to interrupt me if there's a burning question that you think I need to address immediately.
Okay, will do.
So I thought I might start off by telling you a little bit about myself and my coaching practice. And I want you to pay particular attention to how I do this. So I've always been interested in stories. When I was a kid, I was always writing stories, fantasy, fairy tales, the stuff I like to read, the stuff I still like to read, to be honest. When I got to college, I studied history because I was interested in the stories that had actually happened to actual real people. And my first career out of college was in journalism, where I wrote stories about that were happening to real people right now. I became interested in business and eventually got an MBA and spent the next decade in marketing roles at Alaska Airlines and Amazon. However, over time, I found that my stories tended to be about the numbers in my spreadsheets, and I missed stories about people. I found my way to coaching, where my work now is all about my clients' stories. In some ways, my work has come full circle, although now I view the stories through the perspective of 20 years in the workforce, raising children while in that workforce, and finding a path to meaningful work that makes sense to me. Okay, enough about me. Let's talk about your career and the role of networking. Nothing I'm going to say here is rocket science, but I'm hoping the framework and organization of content is helpful to you as you think about your career. I want to note that while I'm describing real clients, I'll talk about their industries in very general terms. I may change their professions and I may change up the pronouns in order to protect my client's confidentiality. There's one exception with real details because the story is so good and I want to explicitly call that out. Okay, topic of this webinar is how to network when you're not networking. For the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to assume that that means that you mostly like your job. Maybe you're starting to think about what's next, but you're not in a full-blown job search, although everything I'm going to say about that is still highly relevant if you are. So what can you do now to prepare for a future job search or promotion or career change? How can you plant the seeds for that future state in a way that is interesting and natural and engaging? Let me share my screen so you can see the structure of what we're going to cover in the next 40 minutes. It can be useful to think of networking in terms of the investigative who, what, where, when, how. Although I'm going to mix up the order and start with why. Why do you even need to bother with this networking thing? We're going to talk about something I call career life cycles, which sounds awful, doesn't it? Actually, I think you'll find it really reassuring. We're then going to jump to the who to network with. And we're going to talk about luck and rabbits and a wall in your house. Confused yet? We're going to talk about the what. What do you even say in a networking conversation? You know you're supposed to network, but what does that even mean? We'll go through a couple of the dreadfuls. Sounds dark, right? We'll talk about how to reach out to people you don't know, and I'll share a template I use with my clients. And we'll talk about when it's time to move on to your next thing. How do you know that's the right decision? Okay, we're starting with the why. Why bother networking, even when you're not really networking? No matter what's going on in your life right now, and I hope there are lots of good things going on, you likely have a job, or you will have a job, or you have had a job. Ideally, you love your new job. It meets your needs, whatever they may be. Good salary, autonomy, growth, challenge, structure, responsibility, meeting, friendship, benefits, prestige, whatever is important to you. However, over time, you start to think about wanting something else. Maybe you want to grow in the role. Maybe you hate your manager. Maybe you're just curious about something else. For whatever reason, at some point, it's highly likely, and I'll go out on a limb and say it's almost guaranteed, that you'll think about moving on. So what do? You start looking for a new job. Maybe it's in your field. Maybe it's at your current company. Maybe it's across the country. Maybe it's a total change. And eventually, one way or another, it is highly likely that you will find a new job. And that cycle repeats. Like I said, not rocket science. Now, of course, there is the scenario where you hate your new job. I want to offer the perspective that that's in fact a good thing. You've learned something. You've learned that you never want to do whatever that is again. If you hate your new job, eventually, hopefully, you start looking for a new job. And eventually, one way or another, it is highly likely that you will find a new job. You want to be loosely repeating steps 1 through 4 for the entirety of your career, with a couple of step 2 X's thrown in there for course correction. Networking during step 2 and 3 lays the foundation for the success of step 4. It's the hardest time to do it, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Now let me get out a screen share, give you a break from PowerPoint. Okay, before we go any further, let's define networking, or at least how I like to think about networking. A lot of my clients first sit down with me with this sense of this onerous, arduous, potentially humiliating chore that they know they should do, but they don't really know how to do it, and they're dreading it. Does that sound familiar? I talked to a new client just the other day. He worked at a large company. He was buried in his work, said he was awful at networking and never met anyone outside his building. That's probably pretty typical, right? We talked about how networking is about having interesting conversations with people doing cool work in this world. That's the mindset I approach networking with. People are usually nice, and it's fun to talk with people who are doing great work that you're interested in. It's exciting, energizing. Okay, so how do you find those interesting people in order to have those interesting conversations? We are now at the who. In order to get to that, we need to talk about the role of luck in your career. You're lucky to have a good manager who supports you and is interested in your potential. You're lucky that you happen to hear about your current role from some random connection. You've got that lucky break. I could go on, but do you see what I'm getting at here? And yes, I know you're also really smart and you've worked really hard to get to where you're at in your career. As I was procrastinating and avoid working on this presentation, I read a quote in the Atlantic magazine from a famous mathematician talking about the election. He said, "Unlikely things happen so constantly that you could say reality is mostly one unlikely thing after another." You can ask pretty much any successful person about their career, and most, will say that they got really, really lucky. I found that to be true in my coaching practice anyway. All of which is to say that I am convinced that luck is probably going to play a major role in your career, in addition to your hard work and expertise and smarts. So we need to talk about managing luck. To illustrate the role of luck, I want to talk about rabbits. So I have giant rabbits in my backyard. It all started with Papa Bunny, giant gray bunny. I knew he wasn't neutered, and it's possible I didn't share that information with my husband. He seemed lonely, pining, so I got him a friend who I happen to know wasn't spayed. Pretty soon we had a lot of bunnies, which really isn't the point of this story, but you know that saying about rabbits? It's true. Anyway, one day, just after Easter, I got a call from a friend. There's a little baby Easter bunny in her garden getting eaten alive by crows, and could I come rescue it? Of course, we go get the little baby bunny, put it in with all its new bunny friends. And the huge rabbits try to eat the baby bunny. It's like Watership Down in my backyard. I've got a problem. I go for a dog walk and I run into my neighbor. I tell her about my rabbit problem, and a friend of hers joins us. We finish chatting and laughing about rabbits, and my dog and I wander home. 20 minutes later, I get a text from my neighbor. Her friend had just texted her to tell her that she saw a perfectly new rabbit hutch on the side of the road. Kids and I jump in the car, we go get the rabbit hutch, put it in the backyard, and put the baby bunny in there with lots of straw and timothy hay and mint and sage and parsley from the garden. Happy baby bunny, problem solved. So the reason I like this story as a metaphor for networking is that it's all about luck. I happened to run into my neighbor. I happened to talk about the bunny problem. Her friend happened to stop by. Her friend see a rabbit hutch sparkling on the side of the road as she drove home. She was nice enough to take the time to text my neighbor. My neighbor was nice enough to take the time to text me. This wasn't a straight line to a solution. This was a series of unlikely events like that mathematician described in the Atlantic article. If this story is a metaphor for networking, how do you find the rabbit hutch? How do you help luck find you? How do you optimize for luck? We're going to take a couple of different directions to tackle this from. The first has to do with what I call a yes mindset. I work with my clients about being open to trying new things, meeting new people, doing things that are hard and scary. So, for example, I like to take classes in things I'm scared of. So this has been ski courses, improv, woodworking. Big, scary power tools are scary, right? I think it's important to do things as adults that are challenging, that put us in beginner mind. And you meet completely random people when you do this. These people can become part of your network. On a chairlift, we got chatting about work, and as a result, one of my fellow ski students has been one of my favorite clients for a couple of years now. I was networking, I was skiing. So notice, I'm not talking about networking meetings here or networking conferences. I'm just talking about living your life and introducing new and random things into it. We like random, as you'll see. Okay, the elephant in the room right now is how to do this in COVID times. I gotta say, people adapt. I see my clients adapting. It is an excuse to say you can't do this because of masks and social distancing. So for instance, I'm talking to you all right now. That's pretty random. I'm taking an ESL certification course. That's a Zoom classroom full of potential new networks, right? I want to invite you to type in the Q&A how you've adapted and are doing hard, fun, scary things while still following public health rules. PU, interrupt me, and let's hear if you get a good list, okay? In addition to stirring some randomness into your life despite COVID, let's talk about building out your network laterally. Again, without really networking. One way of thinking about this is to make friends at work, intentionally make friends at work. And let me share a client story to illustrate this. This client works at a large tech company that you've heard of. She's a lovely person, kind, funny, super smart. She had gotten feedback that her coworkers thought she was a bit aloof. We were mulling over this feedback, which had hurt her feelings and shaken her sense of identity at her work, which she loves. I asked her almost offhand what she does at lunch. This all happened in before times. She described that awful feeling of walking out into the cafeteria seating area, into that sea of faces, and being afraid of not seeing anyone she knew and not having anywhere to sit and have people watching her. Can you relate to that feeling? She said it reminded her in a pretty awful way of middle school. She said it's a lot easier to just eat at her desk and just not deal with that feeling. We talked about how that perception that she's aloof and her eating lunch at her desk by herself could be related. We talked through different solutions, and she decided she would say yes when colleagues were asking around to see if anyone wanted to go to lunch. Saying her ideas out loud to me, her coach, transforms this should into a plan and a commitment that she actually wants to do, which is one of the cool things about coaching. So she's saying yes, she's doing something that's scary for her, and she's building out her network laterally by making friends at work. She's networking without networking. Again, it's just lunch, it's not rocket science. So obviously, this is harder to do virtually, and it's a lot easier to turn off your video camera and avoid the virtual lunchrooms or happy hours or whatever else your organization is doing to bring people together in these times. And that's probably a mistake and a missed opportunity to network when you're not really networking. So we've got random and we've got lateral networking. Now let's talk about growing your network up through your organization, even when you're not really networking. Let me share a client story to illustrate this. This client works in marketing for a large telecommunications company. MBA, middle management, ambitious, young. She first started working with me because she wanted to work on her confidence. She told me a story about how her manager was presenting some big, interesting proposal to his executive and asked her if she'd like to help him give the presentation. Good manager, right? That's all about visibility. She said no. She had reasons about being tired. She'd had a long week. But mostly she was scared. And then she was full of regret and self-recrimination. There's a lot going on in that story from a coaching perspective in terms of growth mindset and confidence and anticipating her manager. But I want to look at this story in terms of building your network upwards through the organization. Who knows whom she would have met if she had gone to that meeting? Who would have seen her? Who might she have connected with? Who might have sponsored her on an interesting project as a result? If you say no, you know exactly what will happen. Who knows what will happen if you say yes? I want to go off on a little bit of a tangent and talk about increasing your visibility. Let me share a quick story to illustrate this. And it's not actually about a client. This was at a dinner party. I was chatting with a friend of a friend in the kitchen in before times. She was talking about how her boss keeps asking her to publish thought leadership pieces on LinkedIn. She was complaining, that just seems like a waste of time. I couldn't help myself. I pointed out gently how that's a self-sabotaging perspective. Writing and publishing or otherwise communicating broadly about areas where you have expertise is a great way to increase your visibility and increase your chances of developing allies and sponsors higher up in the organization. That's networking without really networking, right? I'd like to add that now, during COVID times, when there are fewer distractions, is a great time to be working on increasing your visibility in a way that plays to your strengths. Not a writer? What about video? Hate the idea of talking to a camera? Think about how you can add to your organization's knowledge management. If you were talking with me in a coaching session, we'd figure out what you can do, what you can sustain, and then we'd calendar it or gamify it somehow, okay? So we've been talking about saying yes to things as one way of finding that rabbit hutch, by stirring randomness, by growing your network laterally, by growing it upwards in your organization, by increasing your visibility. A second way to find that metaphorical rabbit hutch is through jealousy. Weird, huh? But jealousy is a really useful emotion. We tell ourselves stories about why we should or shouldn't do things, or we believe other people when they tell us what we should do or can't do. Jealousy tends to cut through all those shoulds and can'ts searingly. One of my favorite questions to ask clients who are casting about for the next thing is to ask them, who are you jealous of? And then I need to add professionally jealous. I'm not necessarily interested in who my clients are jealous of in terms of other people's appearance or love life or personality, although I might be. These could be people you know. These could be friends or colleagues, maybe people you read about in the newspaper or see on TV. People doing interesting work that gives you that stab of jealousy, that feeling of, shoot, that looks awesome. How come they get to do that? I want to do that. Pay attention to that feeling. It's super useful. This feeling can also show up as wistfulness. Every time I walk into a hospital, I have that wistful feeling of, darn, I wish I were a doctor. There's just something about that environment I really like. Pay attention to that, oh, I wish feeling. Keep track of when you feel jealous or wistful. Write it down. These feelings are a bit like dreams, very ephemeral and easy to blow away once your brain gets busy with the shoulds and can'ts and talks you out of it. So now I want to talk about keeping track of all this randomness. You've had some interesting rabbit hutch conversations. You've been noticing where jealousy and wistfulness show up for you. How do you keep track of all these random threads in a way that leads to something? So let's talk about the wall. Now, I love my spreadsheets, and you could certainly organize this project in a spreadsheet. But I want to think about taking a wall in your home. Every time you have an interesting conversation that has you thinking about what might be next, sometime down the road, you write it down in a sticky and put it on the wall. A client once told me that you also have to put some painter's tape on the sticky, otherwise it will fall off the wall. On that sticky, you write the name of the person you talked with, the date, and something that you learned in that conversation. Okay, I'm going to share my screen because I can't really stand up and show you how this works on a real wall in my office. Okay, this model works whether you're in step 2, 3, or 4 of your career life cycle. The difference probably lies in your intensity and focus. Excuse me, if you're in step 2, when you like your job and have no plans to move on, this is an amble. If you're in step 4 and you're actively job searching, this is a brisk jog. Say you have an interesting conversation with your friend Joe, whom you used to work with. You write Joe's name on a sticky, the date, and something that you learned in that conversation. Now, Joe is going to introduce you to 2 or 3 people in his network. Each of those people gets stickies, and once you talk with them, you date it and you write down something you learned. and they'll introduce you to 2 or 3 people. And then this grows logarithmically. This is a hypothetical scenario. It doesn't usually work quite this well because not all people respond when you reach out to them, but some people do, particularly if you introduce yourself compellingly, which we'll get to. Now, this is where it gets interesting. When you were talking with, say, Mike, he mentioned something you never thought of before. Maybe you didn't even know the field or the role existed. How would you? It's really tough to know what you don't know. And that's why you're ambling along, having these conversations in step 2 of your career life cycle. And that's why you write down something you learned in each one of these conversations. It could be something prosaic like, don't try to eat a hamburger over a networking lunch. Or it could be really profound, some insight into what you really want to do next. The point is, it's your job in these conversations to learn something new, no matter how great or how much of a bomb the conversation was. Anyway, Mike mentions this interesting idea, maybe even just in passing, and it catches your curiosity. That idea gets a fresh new section of the wall. Then you start to think about who you could talk to who works in this random idea. I don't care if you don't think you know anyone. If you have hundreds of LinkedIn connections, which you should, you'll know someone. Look at your alumni associations, your nonprofit boards, your old Frisbee team, people at church. Get really creative. And you start building a network as you explore this new idea. Now you're going to be on a run or a dog walk or in the shower, and you get a totally another random idea. And that idea gets a fresh new section of the wall. And you start to think about who you can talk to, who works in this random idea. See why we like random? Okay, so over time, you slowly build out the wall, exploring new ideas, keeping track of what you're learning. The wall is a living, evolving mind map of the different futures that you're exploring. Okay, that was all hypothetical and risks being pretty BSy. So let me overlay a client story over this model. I have this client's explicit permission to use details so you can really see how the model worked for him. Okay, when we first started working together in October 28, this client was a chemical engineer working as a compliance manager at a chemical company. I'll call him Chris. He was in step 3 in his career life cycle, very experienced in his role and getting kind of tired of it. He was tired of working in a factory. He had this sense that he could be doing something else, something more, but he didn't know what that could be. He starts having a series of conversations with people, former colleagues, old professors, friends of friends. And then Chris has a rabbit hutch conversation. In a moment of panic, he had applied for a compliance job in a related field and had gotten an interview. But he decided he wasn't interested in the role since he wanted to get out of compliance. And this is the important thing. He took the time to call the recruiter to cancel the interview. This recruiter thanked him for letting him know. The recruiter said that a lot of people, they just ghost him if they decide not to interview, which is a bit rich coming from recruitment, which I've observed ghosts job candidates all the time. Anyway, Chris called to decline the interview because he's a polite guy. He's well brought up. In fact, he flew across the country to surprise his mother on Mother's Day, which is irrelevant to the story, but a really good detail. Anyway, Chris and the recruiter started chatting about Chris's plans and his ideas for his career. And during that conversation, Chris connected his expertise in compliance to his interest in sustainability. Although he's an environmentalist in his personal philosophy, he had never considered this professionally, and it would never have occurred to him that his chemical engineering background could be an asset here. That was the rabbit hutch. He then has a number of conversations where this idea evolves. He sent me an update afterwards, which I want to read to you. You can really hear how that in this email, how this new idea is taking shape. He writes, I've also had some good networking calls, and the last one I had really keyed into something I'm interested in around sustainability. So can you hear how he's exploring this new idea, right? He continues, specifically around how businesses are starting to take a more serious look at risk management. You can see how he's really starting to focus on what he wants to do. That last networking call connected Chris with a hiring manager, and eventually he has a job offer and is moving across the country. Notice the timeline here. This project took a year. Chris started in step 3, and he wasn't in a rush. He'd disappear off my radar for months at a time as he worked on networking calls and went skiing and hiking and fishing, literally. Also, notice how non-linear this process is. Back in April, he happened to apply for a job he was qualified for but didn't want, talked with a recruiter, which sparked an idea, which put him on a new path to explore. The point is, when he was in step 3, when he was feeling dissatisfied with his job and career, he didn't start with an articulated vision of working in climate change. It was the process that got him there, not some so-called assessment or workbook or what are your passions kind of conversation. It was just a series of interesting conversations, a series of unlikely events, most of which were dead ends, but all of which led him ultimately in this new direction. All right, hang on, let me get out of PowerPoint. Okay, one last thought before I move on. Think about having a goal of how many networking type of conversations you're going to have. Say you're flying high in step 2, you love your job. However, you know that eventually that will start to change. So what do you want to do now to prepare for that? What can you sustain? One conversation a week? That would lead to some 50 conversations a year. That's a lot of potential rabbit hutches. 2 a month? 1 a month? This is very coachy, but set a goal and calendar time to poke away at it. Actually, I have one more thought. Being forced to do this virtually right now is no reason not to do it. In fact, I think it makes it actually easier. You don't have to figure out where to meet for coffee. You don't have to deal with traffic and parking and ask the other person to significantly interrupt their day to do so. But I want you to think about this one really tactical thing. Make sure you have good equipment. Make sure you have good lighting, a good webcam, and good sound. I was talking to a new client the other day. He was trying for VP roles and was getting interviews, but wasn't landing anything. We were talking through his job search strategy. What could he be doing wrong? And I realized I couldn't really see him. It was like he was sitting in a dark cave. I couldn't see his face or his eyes. His voice was tinny. The angle was all weird. He was like looking down. I was looking at the top of his head. Spend the time and money fixing that stuff, okay? It's probably worth it. Anyway, okay, so now we're going to move to the what and talk about what to say in these networking conversations. Because the very idea of them can be awkward and icky and potentially humiliating, right? Don't worry. Okay, if any of you were here last week, you may remember me saying, if it matters, you prepare. In these networking conversations, in these lucky chance encounters, they matter, and so we're going to prepare beforehand. Over the years, I've collected 6 predictable questions that you know that you're going to be asked in networking conversations. I call them the dreadfuls, the 6th dreadful, although I'm mulling over adding a 7th. Okay, before we jump into the actual questions, I want you to think about the process of answering them as a creative writing exercise. I want you to write out the answer, and when you like that story, I want you to translate it from written English to spoken English, complete with pauses and ums and all the quirkiness of how you actually speak. Once you like that shortened answer, I want you to memorize it. Memorize it to Happy Birthday Song Memorized. And the concept of that level of memorization is borrowed with appreciation from the Wait But Why blog, which I recommend. So when you're sitting across from someone you find really impressive, intimidating even, and they ask you a dreadful, your mouth can be busy answering the question fluently and confidently, while your brain can focus on the things we need it working on, like body language and eye contact, being funny and smart, and not stumbling over some easy, dreadful question and feeling like an idiot and losing confidence and potentially missing the rabbit hutch. Okay, let me switch back to PowerPoint so you can see and hear the dreadfuls. Brace yourself. Okay, the first dreadful is, so Catherine, tell me about yourself. So for a lot of people, this is a dreadful question. I mean, what does it even mean? Are they asking about me personally, professionally, recently, like my whole life? It's a dreadful question because we don't really know what they're asking for, right? If you prepare for this question beforehand, you get to control what it's actually asking. If you think back to the beginning of this webinar, I answered the first dreadful. I said, I thought I might start off by telling you a little bit about myself and my coaching practice. I then told you something about me, a defining characteristic, like I like stories. I traced that characteristic back to when I was a kid writing fairy tales. I weaved it through my education, why I studied history, and my career choices, journalism, MBA, marketing, coaching. I answered the first dreadful, but I answered exactly how I wanted to. And hopefully it was interesting, memorable, maybe even impressive. As you listened to me answering the first dreadful, maybe you even thought that my career makes sense, that it had followed some logical progression, that maybe I had a plan. Nothing could be further from the truth. Like most careers, mine is a mishmash of luck, chance, and randomness combined with whatever ability and skill and hard work I could throw in there. But it sounds like I have a plan. It sounds like my career makes sense. And that is very powerful and empowering. There's a Steve Jobs quote that I appreciate that he gave it at a Stanford commencement. He said, "You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future." You are connecting those dots in the first dreadful. Now you need to watch out for dreadful variations. These sound like, so what's new? What's your story? What's your deal? What have you been up to? What's up? If your CEO asks you what's up, you don't want to be saying, not much, okay? Sometimes when I work on this with clients, they'll say, isn't this just an elevator pitch? And I guess it is, but to me, an elevator pitch has a salesy flavor to it. I want your answer to the first dreadful to be real. I want it to be about something you actually care about. So I do actually really care about stories and always have. I do actually really care about my client stories. Even though my answer to the first dreadful is just a story, it's a true story. I think when you talk about something that you really care about, that means something to you, it shows in your eyes and in your voice. You're not boring when you talk about something you care about. It's not salesy. So that's how to answer the first dreadful. Identify some defining characteristic, trace it back in time, and then weave it through your educational choices and career. One last thought on the first dreadful. It's easier said than done. This simple little question is actually really hard to answer. So give yourself time to iterate on it. Give yourself time to be inspired. The second dreadful is about your work. Where you are in your career life cycle is going to affect its dreadfulness and its variations. If you're in step 2 and enjoy your work, then the question, what kind of work what do you do? It's probably not a dreadful. However, it's really important that you have an answer to its variation. What are you working on? You need to be ready to go with that answer when you pass someone in your management chain in the hallway, or in a meeting with your zip, with your skip, or over drinks with colleagues at the end of the week. When we get to do that again, maybe in the spring, right? It's a bit tough for me to tell you specifically how to answer that question here, but in general, make your answer relevant to the person who's asking. So that can sound something like this. Hey, Catherine, what are you working on these days? Oh, hi, Mrs. VP. You'd be interested, actually. You know your XYZ initiative? I've been working on ABC that does this cool thing, right? Now, the second dreadful becomes significantly more dreadful if you're in step 3 and 4. You're thinking about a new job, but you're not sure what it is. How do you answer? What kind of work are you looking for if you don't actually know? So let me give you permission to say, I don't know, but you need to package it up so it sounds intentional and interesting. So that can sound something like this. So Catherine, what kind of work are you looking for? That's a great question, Sue, and something I've been exploring. I've been talking to a number of interesting people like yourself as I take the time to figure out these next steps in my career. So I just said, I don't know, but didn't that sound like I had a plan? Plus, I got some flattery in there, which is always a useful tool, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. The answer to the second dreadful evolves as you look for the rabbit hutch. If you think about that client case study, my client Chris started with compliance and ended up in climate change, and his answer to the fourth dreadful was informed by and evolved as a result of every networking conversation that he had. I'm going to skip the third dreadful because it's really for a full-on networking project and not so much when you're networking, but not really networking. But the fourth dreadful is relevant regardless of where you are in your career life cycle. So the question is, how can I help? And it can be dreadful if the person you're talking with doesn't ask you this question, which means you need to make the ask. And that can be really hard for folks. Before I start describing how to answer this question, I want to step back for a moment and talk about the goal of these networking conversations. You're not asking for help. You're not asking for advice. You're asking for ideas. You are trying to know more about what you don't know, and you are asking for introductions to people who might know more about that. You're not sitting at someone's knee in these conversations. What you're doing is aspirational. You want the person sitting across from you or on the other side of that screen to be thinking to him or herself, wow, she's actually really taking care of her career. She's getting out there and networking and talking to people. Damn, I need to be doing that, especially now. Okay? I coach my clients towards that mindset. So there's a two-part answer to the fourth dreadful. Answer 4A is about catching new ideas, uncovering what you don't know, learning something new. As I said before, it's not about asking for advice. I'm very skeptical of advice in general, by the way. No one knows what you should do next. Take any advice with a huge grain of salt, okay? And how's that for advice? Anyway, answer 4A can sound something like this. Catherine, how can I help? Thanks, George, for asking. Given what we've talked about and what you know about my background and interests, where could you see me adding value? Where could you see me slotting into an organization like yours? Right? You're mining for ideas. Notice how the answer is not, what do you think I should do? See how asking for ideas is so much more powerful than asking for advice. Okay, answer 4B is about asking for introductions to people outside your current network. The answer sounds something like this. George, I'm wondering, given what we've talked about in terms of my career growth, whom do you know who could be helpful to me as I explore these next steps. One thing I like to point out to my clients, and I don't really know how important this is, but I actually really think that words matter. Notice how 4B is not a yes/no question. I'm asking, who do you know? Not, do you know anyone? I think it's too easy to say, yeah, no, I can't really think of anyone, sorry. But who do you know? There's an implied flattery to that. Who do you know, you important, connected, influential person? Of course, you know lots of people who could be helpful. See the difference? I'm going to skip Dreadfuls 5 and 6 because they're more relevant for networking and a job search, not as much for the network, for the topic of this webinar. I've written about most of them, so you can just search them, search the Seattle Times or my website. One last thought on the Dreadfuls. As I was preparing for this webinar, I wanted to use that quote about luck and preparedness. We've all heard it, right? I looked it up, and Louis Pasteur said it. Luck favors the prepared mind. When you have that chance, lucky encounter, you want to have the Dreadfuls prepared. Be ready to answer that question from your CEO or your ED or that great manager in that other department who you'd really love to work for. Don't miss the rabbit hutch because you didn't prepare. Okay, so I bet the burning question some of you may have right now is, yeah, great, but I don't even know that person. How they don't know me. Why would they waste their time? So we've gotten to the how. How do you reach out to someone who you've never met or haven't talked to in years and years? So a lot of the answer has to do with asking for what you want, which I went into in some detail in my webinar last week. You need to find the in. How can you help this person? How can you make them look good? Make it about them, not you. And a little flattery will get you a long way. Let me share a personal story to illustrate this. I received a LinkedIn message out of the blue from someone I never met. So let me read aloud the good bits. Okay, hang on. Hello, Catherine. Thank you very much indeed for having accepted my invitation to connect. It is a real pleasure having you in my network on LinkedIn. I'm reaching out to you because blah, blah, blah. She continues. It's evident from your profile on LinkedIn that you're a high caliber coach and consultant, and I would greatly appreciate the opportunity to talk with you for 30 minutes to hear your insights, blah, blah, and get your perspectives, blah, blah, blah. She goes on. I look forward to hearing back from you. In the meantime, I wish you a wonderful weekend and thank you in advance for your generosity of time and expertise. Okay, so meeting someone I don't know for coffee has a high opportunity cost for me. I charge for my time and my energy, and an hour for coffee with someone I don't know is very expensive for me. But this person recognizes that I'm a high caliber coach. She recognizes that I have expertise and insights, and that feels really good. And this is the important part, even when I know exactly what she's doing in this message. I mean, she recognizes that I have valuable perspective. She sees me as generous. In fact, I have always thought that it is a pleasure to connect with me. So hang on, let me get out of screen share. Needless to say, we had a lovely coffee and I introduced her to a number of people in Seattle. A funny thing about this story is that she's not a native English speaker, and this is the best networking request I've ever received. Okay, so let's wind down and go back to the career life cycle framework and a pretty interesting question that comes up in my office a lot. This is the when. How do you know when you're moving from step 2 to step 3, from loving your job to getting ready to move on? How do you know you're not going through a rough patch, just having a bad day? Maybe it's hormonal, right? How can you know? So one thing I talk about with my clients is something I call the whisper. It's just this little whisper, a whisper of a feeling that something isn't quite right, that this isn't a great fit, that you should be doing something else. Sometimes it's a scream, which is harder to ignore, but pay attention to that whisper. You ignore it at your peril. I work with my clients on getting really clear on what their non negotiables are in their careers and their life. Are you learning and growing in your role? Are you bored? Which is, by the way, really important to pay attention to. Do you start getting sad on Sunday evenings? How much of a role does dread play in your life? What does Monday morning feel like to you? Are you on track for promotion? Is the scope of your responsibilities expanding in a way you want? Are you getting the respect and appreciation that you as a human person naturally and innately want? Answer these questions, or whatever the relevant questions are for you, and give the answer a number on a scale of, say, 1 to 5. Do this every day, once a week, and plot over time. You'll start seeing broad trends. It'll smooth out the bad days, that stupid mistake you made, or that weird look you got from your boss, or whatever else has like churned up this feeling. Okay? If you see a strong signal of, say, bored day after day for a couple of months, then that's probably something to pay real attention to. Tracking these feelings longitudinally helps prevent a reactive response and helps you make a careful, thoughtful decision as you embark on step 4. And with that, we're ready for Q&A.
All right. So while we wait for Q&A, I wanted to know if you wanted to read through the suggestions that people have done to meet new people during COVID times.
Yes, great.
Oh, do you want me to do it? Okay, so the one like that one we got was created a random act of kindness event every 3 months. And I actually wish I knew what the act of kindness was and how they orchestrated it, because that sounds very interesting.
Yeah.
Dan Johnson says he's volunteering for a growing charity that serves people that need food and new skills.
Yeah.
Janelle says she joined a hiking group. Trupti says that in her 7-year-old scout, she is her 7-year-old scout den leader and jumped on the committee chair for her 12-year-old son scout troop as well. She helped organize creative meetings with masks for the 7-year-old kids, and for her 12-year-olds, she is organizing safe holiday service projects. That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Jenny joined a ministry serving middle schoolers remotely during COVID. Let me see if I missed something. Katura says that she's amused that she's amused that you framed during COVID times as a period of less distraction. She said not in her experience as a parent trying to work from home.
Oh yeah, I wanted to add, like, if you have young children, yeah, be good. Yeah.
All right, with that, we are ready for questions. You can type up your question or like somebody else's question, and we will wait. Okay, so Mariko says, how can I respond to a person's dreadful comment? Your English is pretty good, implying you don't sound like a native speaker, even before asking about work or career questions in networking or an interview.
Oh, so yeah. I mean, I think it depends on sort of the atmosphere and temperature, but I think it would be very reasonable to say, well, yeah, your English is actually really good too. It's super rude, right? And it's kind of, I don't know, it depends how risky it is, right? And you could also, if you think it's too risky, you just say thank you. Thank you. I've actually lived in the United States my entire life. So you have to play it by ear.
It looks like there were 2 people with that question. And then Vanessa asked, where will the recordings be posted? She did not find the previous ones. I am pretty sure they are up. I'm going to put the link back in your answer in a second. Any more questions?
I guess I covered it, huh? We'll put everybody to sleep.
Okay. All right. So Gabriel says, when do you follow up with someone you are trying to network with, and when do you decide to let go and move on?
Yeah,
That's a great question.
that's a great question. I think it's like a weekly, like ping after a week, ping after another week. And then, maybe ping like 3 weeks later and then let it go. Something like that.
That makes sense. Jody says they are not asleep and they're just listening. Thank you for that, Jody.
Thank you, Jody.
Jenny asks, do you have a good response for shoulds in the moment?
Huh. I think this response, it's funny because shoulds actually make me really angry. I think just hearing it is a great, just like having the self-awareness of like, oh, that was a should, right? Like that person just told me should. That person thinks that they know better. I think that really that's the work of catching it, of hearing it, and maybe not so much to responding to it unless it's really worth it, right? And I'd have to know more about the details, but I think just like not letting it damage you, that's the work.
Okay. So Oscar asks, once you have a great conversation, how do you keep cultivating your network? Do you update them? Oh, and that question jumped. Do you update them on your search, on your ahas, if you think they would find it interesting?
So with the caveat that it's going to depend on the relationship, I would, so this is where you want to, if you can, switch the focus to them and not so much on you, right? Like we are all like the most important person in the world, right? But if you heard something in that conversation with them that they were interested in, and you happened to read something that was relevant, or you saw something, a great way to sort of stay in touch is, hey, I saw this article, I thought of you. I'm sure you've already read it, but just in case you missed it, like that kind of way of touching base. And I think periodically it's totally appropriate to tell people like how your plan is evolving since you last talked to them. But I wouldn't do it too much because, again, we're really more interesting to ourselves than to other people.
All right. So Diana says that she had an interview she was qualified for, but didn't have 7 years full-time dedicated work experience. She's a freelancer. The interview was great and I prepared and did a decent, sorry, these are jumping everywhere, decent job sharing her experience. She didn't get the job, but a recruiter followed up and gave her the assistant's name to follow up in case she saw other jobs. This is a story and not a question. So I think she's trying to illustrate your point where it did help her to know the recruiter, and they did like her. And even though the interview itself was not successful, there were opportunities over there.
Yep, that's nice. And I bet that felt really good for her.
Right. So Kadura says, my industry has been severely impacted by COVID and my immediate coworkers have kind of scattered to the winds after a huge layoff. How do I gauge whether it's rude to check up on folks and ask what people have moved on to?
Oh, so that's not rude at all, right? I mean, why would that be rude? And I guess one way to like gauge rudeness is, so if one of her coworkers reached out to her and say, hey, like what do you got going on? What's, like, what are you doing now? Like, would she think that's rude? I mean, I don't think that's rude. I don't see a scenario where that's rude. So she should, by all means, I said should, she can feel really comfortable reaching out to folks and checking in and see where people have moved on to.
Mm-hmm. So Kristen asked a question about how to fully leverage LinkedIn. Kristen, we actually have a great recorded session, very similar to this one, which was done last quarter. And if you go back to our PC website, and I'm going to actually post the link right here, which Matt Youngquist did on fully leveraging LinkedIn. And they're actually two-part series because there was so much information. I would highly recommend that. So her second question is, what role does mentorship play in networking?
That's actually that's an interesting question. So mentorship is it's good. You should definitely be part of whatever mentorship program. You should look for mentors and so forth. The thing is with mentorship is I'm a little cautious with that relationship because it is about advice, right? So depending where you are in your career, you just need to be a little bit careful, right? It's really tempting to give advice. Feels really good to give advice, and there can be something a little like savior seeking from a mentee in that relationship. Anyway, so if you have a good relationship with a mentor, it's like a formalized relationship. You can absolutely feel comfortable asking them for introductions to other people for sure. The worst they're going to say is no.
Joe asks, what is the best way to introduce two parties that might be interested in meeting, for example, a colleague at work?
So I'm assuming he means like over email. You can just Google how to do that. There's great stuff on, like, just find a template on Google.
Mm-hmm. I think his question was whether email or not. This is me guessing.
Okay.
Russ says, and I jumped again, use your accent to your benefit, be proud of your origin, be proud of them, treat yourself as exotic. I went to college in Brazil. That's actually a great advice. Thank you. Okay, questions. Katie says, I'm in stage 1 of networking, back at job and really enjoying it, but also interested in figuring out how to navigate other opportunities potentially within the org in the future. Any suggestions for ways to phrase questions to elicit ideas for opportunities without sounding like I'm ready to actually make a move?
So I think I don't understand the question. So she's happy where who is she raising the questions to?
So I think she is very happy where she is. It's a new job. And she's looking for wordings so that she can learn of opportunities without sounding like she is looking for a move because she's new and happy.
Yeah, so I would suggest that she talks that those conversations, and so I'm presumably this is within her organization. Well, even if it weren't, right? She's in, well, okay, so if it's within her organization, those conversations are about like how she can help, like where the intersections are between her work and this other person's work that she wants to network with, like those sort of conversations. If it's outside of the organization, so she's got this interesting idea and she's like the whole ambling towards it. The wording, is just like, hey, well, so it's not going to get. I'm wondering if she's worried about the risk of it getting back to her.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
That's
so
exactly right.
Okay, so this comes up a lot, right? And a lot of this is like you have to really think about, like, so what's the real risk here? Like, what is the risk that it's going to get back to your organization? And it may be high, which would be weird. Okay. And the other consideration is, so it is like appropriate to network. It is appropriate to talk to other people, right? So it's not like you're cheating on your job. It's not, you have no plans of leaving. You just are exploring other things in the world, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. Everybody does that or should do that, right? So your boss is doing that or should be, right? So it's not like you're doing something wrong. Okay, so Pu, do you think I answered the question there?
I think so. Yeah. Okay. So this is your last question, and we are 5 minutes over. And Katie
Okay.
actually also says that did answer her question. So Dan asks, how do you recommend following up with a person after it's been way too long, and way too long is in quotes?
Yep. Yep. Okay. So this comes up a lot, right? Because it feels super cringy, right? Like you worked with somebody 10 years ago and then you haven't talked to them for 10 years and now you need something from them, right? That feels awful. And I like to turn this around. Okay. So if somebody reached out to this, what's the first name here, Pio?
Dan.
Okay, so Dan, if somebody reached out to you who you haven't talked to in 10 years out of the blue and wanted to chat with you, like you would, right? Like, of course you would. You'd be happy to hear from them, right? It wouldn't be weird and awkward. It's only weird and awkward when we think about it from like our perspective. But it's like great to hear from somebody from 10 years ago. You know, it's like, wow, they actually remember me. Okay. So don't you just work, just plow through it. It's not, it feels awkward. It's not. And it wouldn't be awkward if they did it to you. Okay.
All right. Okay. So we are 6 minutes over, and so we should finish here. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Catherine, for a lovely time in these 2 sessions with us. I hope we get to work with you again and again. For everybody who's attending, the recordings and slides will be posted back on the same page that you registered for this. It is not on LinkedIn, it is on our website. And the final event next week, where Matt comes back, he's talking about how to build your personal brand and how to differentiate yourself in your field. I hope to see everybody there. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.